what happened is that fairly early on, I was able to get permission to film a national treasure. I don't know if you remember, it's a very stylized piece that has a huge river in the middle, and then red plum and white plum on either side. And that belongs in a private museum. But I was able to talk them into letting me film it in natural light, and nobody's ever filmed a national treasure in natural light before. And once people saw what that looked like and the way that the gold leaf comes back alive after 300 years, they said, okay, you can film my work. That really opened the door. And also, nobody had ever filmed those folding screens on a dolly track before. A cinematographer is one of the great cinematographers in Japan, and he kept saying, Linda, we need movement, and so we really innovated that. And so once collectors and some museum people started to see what the folding screens could look like and how some of them popped out in 3D because we were filming it on this fabulous Sony 4K camera with the dolly, people really started to come on board. But it took a while.
But even people who really appreciate Japanese paintings and might have seen them at major museums like the Met and so on, or have books, or perhaps have pieces themselves. I mean, what we've done is extraordinary because of the scale we're able to see them at. It's a bit of a revelation. Do you have questions?
Can I just add one thing? I actually feel that when you said the scale that we see them at, you can imagine people are sitting on the floor, it's 20 feet, so it's 8 meters wide and almost as taller than the average human being, and you have all these different things going on, and depending on where you sit or you stand, I actually came to see those folding screens as the cinema of the day. You could enter it where you wanted to. You could tell your own narrative. So that was something of a revelation to me.
They're open fields. Yeah. Question or comment? While you're putting your thoughts together, can I ask you what Japanese art was, say, 100 years before the first works you're showing us here?
Much of what you're seeing here, the origins of it dated back many, many centuries. But Edo, and so it's kind of artificial to call it Edo avant-garde. I mean, Japanese were integrating texts and paintings from the 8th century. But Edo was the time when they shut their borders. And of course I've received the question, are you acknowledging the fact that Chinese art really influenced Japanese art? Absolutely. Absolutely. But during the Edo period, they stopped sending envoys to China. They didn't let any Westerners in, basically, and it consolidated this singular Japanese aesthetic. So the tale starts a long, long time ago, but not being colonized, not having warfare, having a very wealthy merchant, what we would call kind of upper middle class. So, but their lives were somewhat restricted. So, but they could spend as much money as they wanted on art, and that's when you get this. And when you think of the fires and the tsunamis and the earthquakes and the wars that followed, a lot of people say maybe there's 5% left of what was created. So there was this vast treasure trove that was generated and enjoyed at the time.
We have a couple of questions now. We'll start in the front and then back corner and then very back, please. So start here, sir.
Based on the comment you made about how museums viewed the work differently after you filmed it, do you think that's going to result in a change in how they display the work in the future?
Do you mind repeating the question? Oh, the question is, do you think museums will start to change their exhibition policies based on this film? What I'd really like to see is museums start to change their policy about showing more non-European work. I made this film partly to combat the kind of Eurocentrism in art overall, and specifically to sort of retrace the origins of modern art back to a very different place and re-acknowledge the incredible contribution that the Japanese made that was acknowledged at the time. You saw the Van Gogh quote, you go to Giverny, Monet's home, and you see the woodblock prints. It was called Japonisme, you know. So that's what I'm trying to get people to acknowledge again, I guess. That was the biggest theme for me.
Linda, why don't you just take a couple steps this way? It won't be quite so loud. Yes, please.
These are masterworks by all of the top historic painters. And I know in Western culture, you know, a lot of us sort of prefer preparation drawings of larger paintings from Western artists because they're just more free. They're just freer. So is there very much evidence of, you know, some of these artists doing smaller sketches or little studies for these screens, or how does?
You know, it's a very good question. It is kind of incredible when you think about the composition and how do you prepare an 8-meter wide. I have to be frank with you, I don't know I've never seen preparatory sketches for the folding screens. What I have seen are incredible sketches. As one of the professors said, Okyo was famous for realism, for sketching from nature. And there are many, they did them on scrolls, but they're incredible sketches that they clearly shows that they went out into nature and sketched birds and plants and etc. in detail. But I have to tell you, those sketches don't look rough at all. They're incredibly detailed, and most of those sketches belong in the Japanese museums, and some of those museums are harder to get permission to film in, so I couldn't include them, but thank you for the question. There are, but it is interesting. How did they map out the compositions for those gigantic screens? I've never seen sketches for those.
At the very back, yes, please.
Yeah, this is more a comment than a question. Some of the going back and forth from the static art of the Edo period to views of nature that are done by the cinematographer and yourself, that was just amazing, just beautiful. The one that now sticks in my head is the cranes landing. That is just amazing. And so I appreciate your choice of cinematographer and editor, etc.
Well, they're two of the greatest, and the cranes actually was shot by Kirsten Johnson, who's a genius American woman cinematographer. But I credit Sony at the end because they let me use their 4K camera for free, and their lenses, because they believed in my vision and my cinematographers, and they knew. But what that camera allowed us to do with those cranes is to shoot in slow motion 10 times slower than reality. And up until now, before they invented this camera 4 years ago, you had to take a camera that big with 3 operators in order to get that kind of slow motion. But with the Sony camera, the camera's like this. The lens is like this, and we were able to film the cranes taking off and landing in 10 times slow motion, and birds in general move at 10 times the speed of human sight. So we were finally able to slow it down so we can see what they're doing with their bodies and their wings, and it almost felt to me from some of the depictions of the cranes on the folding screens that somehow those Japanese painters were almost seeing in slow motion as well. They're so detailed and so articulated that it made it easy to match. But thank you, we worked hard to pull that off. And it was very, very, very cold when we filmed the cranes. It was minus 25. But to get the snow and the ice and the mist and all of that's what we needed. So thank you.
Far question against the wall first, please.
As an architect, I designed a hotel in Japan 30 years ago, and our client, our Japanese client, was from a family that had hotels for many years, and originally were samurai, and they took us to their samurai house in Nikko, and that house was built in the late 1500s, and I was blown away by how contemporary that house was. And I wonder if your studies have taken you into architecture as well in Japan, and just how is it that this country has done such extraordinary work so centuries before it's hit anywhere else?
Well, that's what thank you. I guess you could say, I was born and raised there. I was raised in one of those old Japanese homes, so I'm completely brainwashed. So I made the film, I think, in order to sort of ask the question, which is, what do we mean by modern? What do we mean by contemporary? One of the things about, this may sound like a digression, but one of the features about Edo era life is that they did not have a word for garbage. Nothing was ever thrown away. They recycled, they reused, they repurposed, and ultimately, finally, it all ended up as some kind of either fuel or, and I honestly think that if we don't go back to that, this climate is doomed. So is that old, or were they doing recycling to show us that this is actually the only way to live on this planet? And I'm going to digress just a little bit farther, because I don't really know how to answer your question without sounding incredibly nationalistic, and I don't think we need any of that right now in any country. But what I would say is that after the tsunami, the great tsunami in 2011, and so much of the Northeast coast was stolen back by the seas, they discovered ancient markers from the 8th century and the 10th century high up in the cliffs saying, don't build below this. And I feel that this art, in a similar way, they left this for us to say, if you really treat nature with respect and you open your heart to see the spirits and the souls that reside in the rocks and the mountains and the forests, this is what it can look like. So I feel that it's a great gift that they left us to remind us of how the natural world can appear to us if we open our eyes and our hearts. But
Sure.
There was a focus in the screens about the perspective of the paintings being really flat, and I just thought it was really interesting how with
I'm sorry, a focus being
with like the perspective in the paintings on the screens being sort of more flat, also.
Not Western, not with the vanishing point.
Yeah.
being the flat perspective.
Yeah. And I'm just curious about, I just noticed like an interesting contrast between like when you were filming the screens and the dolly was moving and shifting the perspective, but in filming the actual nature, it was more using zooms as opposed to pushes and maintaining like a static perspective in that scene of nature. And so I just thought that was really interesting, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, yeah, it's true. I didn't actually have an unlimited budget. I make my films on believe it or not, an incredibly, by North American standards, minuscule budget. I guess if I had an unlimited budget, I would have, I hate when they put a camera on a drone, because drones to me, I think of warfare, but I would have taken Dolly out into the field and, endless. We did what we could with the money that we had. I shoot very, very little. I don't shoot very much, I guess I was, rather than trying to mimic or replicate the flat of those gigantic folding screens. I was really trying to get people to imagine how the artist might have seen the natural world. That was my big, then what I kept talking with my cinematographer about is, can we get closer, can we see the light? I remember one day saying to him, today let's film the light. And that was the day that the light came through the maple trees. And so we were finding our way. As you can imagine, it's not, the film it wasn't obvious how to make it, you know. How do you present this material? But
this is the world premiere of a paying audience, so what is your hope or expectation for the film? How will people be able to see it? Or might it get a distributor? Will you sell DVDs to art gallery stores and so on?
I already have a theatrical distributor in Japan. All my films tend to get theatrical distribution in Japan because there's a kind of a wider audience there. Here, I actually already have some museums that really want to screen it. And so I'll be focused, and I already have some invitations from universities to screen it. And I feel that I tend to make films for people who want to think about things. And I'm happy with you here tonight. I think you came and you wanted to think about things. And if I understand that that's a very specific audience. Eventually, I don't think it's realistic to have a theatrical distributor in North America, but we're actually working on 2 curriculum for high schools, both to teach Japanese art history, but also to use this film to just teach art. What is line? What is perspective? To try to have an arts education course that doesn't use Western art at all, and how that might, because I feel like if we take Greta Thunberg and her 4 million comrades as any indication, I think there's some young people ready for new perspectives, and especially perspectives that value nature. So that's something.